This is technically sea breeze or ocean breeze or something, but we're going to pretend that it's frankincense. Just imagine. So, punt. What is it? There are many mysteries that come to us from antiquity, including the location of the mysterious Land of Punt. You see, surviving documents from ancient Egypt tell us that Punt was an important trading partner. It was important because of the amount of goods and luxury goods that could be obtained there. So it was very important for the elite of Egypt to maintain status. But it was also political as well. The Egyptian pharaoh could gain a lot of clout from a successful expedition. That's why they build these monuments and inscriptions to trading expeditions. Look at me, I managed to go to Punt, look at all the stuff I got from there. So since it was an important trading partner of Egypt, you might think that we must know a lot about Punt, but that's where the problems kind of begin. We don't even know where it is. Think about it for a second. It's kind of like your favorite shopping center. Do you write in your diary the exact location, turn right at King Street and left at Elizabeth Street or whatever? Or do you just write a shopping list? That's kind of what we're working with from the evidence left over from Egypt. What do we know of Punt? Much of our information comes from Egyptian propaganda, like I said. We know that the Egyptians were trading with them way back in the Old Kingdom period of Pharaonic Egypt. That's around 2700, 2200 BCE, so roughly 5,000 years ago. It's a long time. The oldest references to Punt come from the 5th dynasty, from what's known as the Palermo stone. The stone mentions the Egyptians received 80,000 measures of myrrh, along with some other items, but the tablet is like pretty fragmented, so it's not very easy to read. Punt has been heavily associated with frankincense and myrrh, as well as other goods including pygmies, baboons, gold, oxen and bulls, panther skins, and as well slaves. Research into the origins of these different goods kind of suggests that Punt might have been a trading hump and didn't actually produce all of this stuff by itself, because a lot of these things come from different areas. The best and most extensive information on Punt comes from the New Kingdom period. That's around 1570 to 1069 BCE, from Hatshepsut's mortuary temple, Dir el-Bahri, which was a monument to her achievements. It was propaganda for her divine rule. At Dir el-Bahri, it includes scenes of an expedition to Punt that occurred sometime between the 7th and 9th year of Hatshepsut's reign, and it is on the southern wall of the middle terrace of her temple. So, where previously historians were relegated to essentially itemized shopping lists from Punt, Hatshepsut's temple gives us actual images of the ships that sailed to Punt, as well as the Puntite people, their huts, the landscape. All of this can be used to try and help identify where Punt was. So let's go through the proposed places of Punt. And using what little evidence we have, we'll try and narrow down the possible places. Punt has been associated with Syria, southern Arabia, the Red Sea coast of Saudi Arabia, eastern Sudan, the Horn of Africa, as well as India. So Punt has been associated with a wide range of places. But let's start with Syria. If you've ever looked at a map before, you might know that Syria is located northeast of Egypt. It's near Turkey and Iraq. Its location makes it almost impossible to be the location of Punt. So there's a tribute scene found in the tomb of Rekhmia from New Kingdom Egypt, and that associates Punt with being east of Egypt. And yes, Syria is east of Egypt. But almost all of our sources also confirm that Punt was south, and you get there by traveling along the Red Sea. And since Syria is north and is nowhere close to the Red Sea, kind of rules it out as a possible location. Let's move to India. Yes, India is east of Egypt, and you could get there by sailing down the Red Sea, but it's so far away. To be honest, I've only seen one source that even mentioned India as an option. Nobody really takes it seriously. But if we were to take it seriously, what evidence is there? Not much. Let's think of Egypt for a second. You might think of them as a seafaring, water-based culture. I mean, they traveled on the Nile a lot. They used it to ferry things around, but they weren't actually a seafaring culture. There is evidence at the port of Wadi Gwasis, which suggests that the Egyptians did sail, but stele from the area indicates that the ships to Punt were custom built for Punt. The Egyptians weren't sailing very often. One stele says expedition leader An-Amkti, who had been building a ship there for going to Punt. Similarly, the boats depicted on the walls of Dir al-Bahri, they were bigger than your typical riverboat with one large square sail, but they're not exactly big seafaring boats. Sailing the Nile or even following along the coast of the Red Sea is one thing, but getting through the Gulf of Aden and across the Arabian Sea is another task entirely. Additionally, think of the speed of travel. In 51 BCE, Cicero, a Roman guy, travelled from Athens to the island Samos. It took him 14 days, but in the meantime, he was island hopping as well, so it took him a little bit longer. Lionel Casson, author of Travel in the Ancient World, states that a slow sailing vessel in Greece being a sea-based culture, should have been able to take the trip in 3 or 4 days. That would put the slowest sailing vessels in Greece, a sailing-based culture, in the 1st century BCE at about 2 knots. The Egyptians, on the other hand, like we've established, were not sea or sailing-based peoples, and the earliest mentions of Punt come from the 3rd millennium BCE, so about 2,500 years, give or take, before Cicero's journey. So we can probably assume that they were traveling a lot slower. They didn't have the technology and it was a lot earlier than Cicero. So if we give them a generous 1 knot to travel by, it would take just less than 130 days to reach India from Egypt, not accounting for any stoppages that they would have had to resupply or any bad weather they encountered or anything that might have slowed them down for any reason. Now, if we look at the annals from Thutmose III at Karnak, they record 2 times that the Egyptians received goods from Punt, in the year 33 of Thutmose III's reign and in year 38. Honestly, this could just be a rebrand from Hatshepsut's expedition, but that's beside the point. If we take this at face value, 2 separate expeditions, each of them are only pronounced to take 1 year, either year 33 or year 38, which suggests that at most the expeditions to Punt took 1 year. Personally, I also believe that if the journey did take more than 12 months, the Egyptians would have said so, at a sign of, look how far we went, it took us 2 years, how good are we kind of vibe, you know? So because of how slow the Egyptian sea vessels probably were, Punt in India, very unlikely. Now we move on to trickier areas to dismiss. The Arabian coast seems like a perfect candidate for Punt due to its easterly direction, and areas such as Eritrea, Djibouti, and southern Sudan also seem likely due to their southerly direction. Now, Sudan may be ruled out of the running for Punt because of political and geographical reasons. Sudan, or Nubia, which was in Sudan, was directly below Egypt, and it was often in conflict with Egypt. Punt, however, was probably too far away for the Egyptians to try conquering it, or there was too many other nations between Egypt and Punt for an invasion to be feasible. This probably rules out Eastern Sudan as a place for Punt because there were several periods where Egypt was either in control of Nubia or periods of time when the Nubians ruled Upper Egypt, which means if Punt was in Eastern Sudan, those periods of control over Nubia and Egypt would have made accessing Punt easier, but you don't see that in the records, which means it was probably a little bit further away. Ralph Pedersen notes that the Arabian and African coasts of the Red Sea are surprisingly symmetrical. Breaks in coastal reefs occur at roughly the same points, and several harbours occur across from each other. This would have made east-west sailing slightly easier. So it makes Arabia, southern Arabia, a good point for where Punt might be. The lists of items received from Punt include frankincense and myrrh and baboons, of which the Hamadras baboons can be found throughout Eritrea, Djibouti, Ethiopia, Somalia, and western parts of Yemen, as you can see from this map. So if we're taking baboons into account, it excludes the western coast of Saudi Arabia and the northeastern part of Sudan. Then there's frankincense. Frankincense comes from plants from the Boswellia genus. There are different types of Boswellia plants, including apparently a species in India, but we've already ruled India out. According to Nigel Groom, in a paper from 1997, there's one tree species found in Arabia, 3 to 4 types on an island of Socotra off the coast of Yemen, and 5 to 6 types in Somalia. There's also one type that can be found in Central and East Africa, but according to our dear friend Nigel, it produced poor quality frankincense, and the Egyptians were after that good luxury stuff. So if we're to take into account both baboons and frankincense, perhaps archaeologists should be looking into Somalia and Yemen for potential places for Punt. But hold your horses, okay? You remember way back at the start of this video, I mentioned that Punt was probably a trading hub and didn't necessarily produce all of the goods that it sold. Yeah? So that means we've got to dig a little bit deeper into the evidence. Now, many scholars have ruled Arabia or Yemen out of the running because of references from Egypt to land travel to Punt. So there's an inscription from the 6th dynasty which talks about an official called Harkuf and his expedition to Yam in Nubia. As you can see from this map, he travelled via land. So the inscription mentions that the pharaoh of the time was more excited to see this pygmy than the gifts of the mineland of Punt. So though it's agreed that Harkuf didn't actually make it to Punt, some scholars believe the pygmy referenced came from Punt, and Yam was just like a halfway mark between Egypt and Punt. I, however, view this inscription as just like referencing a different pygmy that was brought from Punt much earlier than Harkuf's expedition, and it just reminded the king of that earlier expedition. More convincingly is the inscription from Dir al-Bahri. Remember, that's Hatshepsut's mortuary temple. One line, written as though from the perspective of the god Amun, says, "I have led them on water and on land." This could mean that it was possible to get to Punt via the Red Sea or via a land route. Alternatively, it has been suggested that on water and land could mean that the expedition had to cross the eastern desert in Egypt to get to Wadi Gawassis, and then they sailed to Punt, or they sailed to Punt and then had to continue further inland to get to the proper place. The inscription then moves on to the Egyptians' arrival in Punt, where a chief asks them, "Have you travelled on water or on land?" which is better suggesting that land travel was possible. In tomb TT143, there are reliefs showing Puntites arriving in Thebes with goods to trade. The boats are small and raft-like, which brings into doubt of their seaworthiness. Catherine Glenister suggests that these small boats would have been used on the Nile, not the Red Sea, which kind of suggests that there was an overland route through the Nubian desert, and then once they reached the Nile, the Puntites used the river to travel up to Thebes. So, if you could get to Punt via land, that must rule Arabia out. Stanley Belander, however, is not one to rule out Arabia just because of a silly thing like land routes. He says the translation of this phase means both sides of the sea. His paper actually goes very in-depth into the reasoning of this translation, and I recommend you read it. I don't have time to get into all the nitty-gritty details. But anyway, he says that there is only one place along the Red Sea where ships could stop and be able to see both sides of the sea. And that at the narrowest point along the Straits of Bab el-Mandeb, so with Djibouti on one side and Yemen on the other side. Personally, I think he's grasping at straws here. Yemen and Arabia really should be ruled out of the picture by now. But if you are convinced by Belander's argument, let's look at a different interpretation of both sides of the sea. Rodolfo Fadovic suggests that this twin shore that's mentioned by the Egyptians actually refers to the Bay of Zula, which is in Eritrea. He says that the bay is large enough to be perceived as part of the sea and also narrow enough to view both sides of the bay from ships entering it and to stand on one side and see the opposite bank. Fadovic also says that Dalak Kebir, which is an island just outside of the Bay of Zula, might be the island that is mentioned in the ancient story Tale of the Shipwrecked Sailor. So in this story, a man is shipwrecked on an island and meets a snake who calls himself the ruler of Punt. The serpent then gives the man a whole bunch of goodies to take back home, including frankincense and myrrh, and then it takes the man about 2 months to get back to the residence of the sovereign, which is probably Thebes. So it should be mentioned that there are quite a few islands along the Red Sea, including off the coast of Djibouti. But if we take this one, Dalak Kebir, a trip from the port Safaga in Egypt to Massawa in Eritrea, which is just outside of the Bay of Zula, would take 31 days and 10 hours at 1 knot non-stop. So if we take into account wind speed, currents, any stoppages that the ship might have to make for resupplying or anything like that, it is possible that Dalak Kebir and the Bay of Zula may have been approximately 2 months away from Thebes via boat. So let's take a closer look at Eritrea. Archaeological excavations at Wadi Gawassis, remember that's the port that ships to Punt used, include ceramics from the Sudanese Eritrean lowlands and as well as the Bay of Zula. So there are different cultural groups from those areas, which means the ceramics at Wadi Gawassis could be very easily identified to the different areas. There's also inscriptions from Dir al-Bahri, which refer to the goddess Hathor as mistress of Punt, as well as in the story of Sinue, Hathor is referred to as mistress of Punt. There was actually a translation error that said Werewet, mistress of Punt, so shout out to Brent Davis for helping me decipher that one, because that really sent me into a tailspin. But Hathor is a cow goddess, and people from the highlands of Eritrea were herders. Dir al-Bahri gives us images of 2 types of cattle from Punt. There's a short-horn and a long-horned type of cattle. So this paper about indigenous cattle from Eritrea shows that there are 2 types of indigenous cattle. One is the Baka breed, which has shorter horns, and one is the Arado, which have longer horns, just like Dir al-Bahri. So the TLDW is Punt is not in Syria because it's too far north. It's not in India because it's just too far away. It's probably not on the coast of Saudi Arabia or Western Yemen because the Egyptians might have been able to access Punt via a land route. It is instead probably somewhere near Djibouti or Eritrea, which is far enough away that Egypt wasn't thinking about invading Punt, but also close enough to get to. More specifically, the evidence points more towards the Bay of Zula due to the both sides of the sea inscription and matching cattle native to the area. There's still a lot of archaeological investigation that needs to happen. Unfortunately, Eritrea is quite wet. A lot of the water for the Nile and everything comes from the Horn of Africa, which makes surviving material a lot harder to find. It doesn't survive as well. So that's where I'm going to leave you. My personal thoughts is maybe we should be looking in Eritrea around the Bay of Zula or that area more for the Land of Punt. But what do you think?